The wind in Arizona territory did not just blow, it scoured. It carried the grit of 3 deserts, the heat of 1,000 suns, and, in the year 1875, the metallic tang of an approaching future that promised to crush everything in its path. Redemption Ridge sat on the very edge of the known world. A cluster of timber and adobe buildings huddled against the vast, bleeding expanse of the Red Rocks. To the east lay the promise of the Atlantic and civilization. To the west, the jagged spine of the mountains where the Red Hawk tribe still rode free. In the middle sat the town, a purgatory of dust and ambition. The air here smelled of sawdust from the new construction, cheap whiskey from the saloon of the Golden Steer, and the nervous sweat of men waiting for the railroad money to pour in. Lena Hartley wiped her forehead with the back of her wrist, leaving a streak of pale dust against her skin. She stood on the porch of her father's clinic, a modest structure that smelled perpetually of carbolic acid and dried sage. At 25 years of age, Lena had long since stopped worrying about the state of her complexion. The women of the church auxiliary whispered that her skin was too brown from the sun and her hands too rough from work. But Lena knew that soft hands could not set a broken bone, and a pale complexion would not survive an hour in the high desert noon. She watched a column of soldiers from the nearby fort ride down the main street. They sat stiffly in their saddles, their blue uniforms coated in a film of gray dust. Major Silas Crowley rode at the front. He was a man who wore his authority like a corset tight, restrictive, and likely to snap under pressure. Beside him rode a man in a civilian suit that cost more than the clinic and the house combined. That would be Bartholomew Pike, the railroad agent. Lena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. "They look like vultures circling a dying calf," a voice said behind her. Lena turned to see her father, Dr. Elias Hartley, leaning against the doorframe. He looked older than his 50 years. The lines around his eyes were etched deep by the glare of the sun and the weight of secrets. "Father," Lena said, her voice dropping to a murmur, "you should not say such things where the street can hear you. The street hears what it wants to hear. Lena, usually, the jingle of silver." Dr. Hartley sighed and rubbed his temple. "Major Crowley was here again this morning. He wants me to sign off on the medical reports for those 2 prospectors who died last week." "The ones who died of thirst?" "The ones Crowley claims were scalped by the Red Hawk Braves," Elias corrected, his voice bitter. "I told him that dehydration does not look like a knife wound. He told me I should check my spectacles." Lena felt a surge of indignation. "He wants to fabricate a war. He wants the valley. Lena, the railroad needs a straight line through the canyon, and the Red Hawk village sits right in the middle of it. Pike and Crowley. They are carving up this land like a Sunday roast before the animal is even dead." Elias retreated into his office, the heavy boots of his profession dragging on the floorboards. Lena watched him go, her heart tightening. They were outliers here. Her father was the only man in 3 counties who would stitch up a settler's leg in the morning and ride out to the reservation to deliver a baby for a tribal woman in the afternoon. To the town, the Hartleys were necessary but suspect. To the Red Hawk people, they were a curiosity white faces with red hearts. That evening, the social pressure that governed Redemption Ridge descended upon Lena with the weight of a stone slab. It was the monthly church social, an event Lena loathed but could not avoid without causing a scandal that would hurt her father's practice. The church hall was stifling, filled with the scent of lavender water and desperation. The matrons of the town sat in a row like a jury, their fans fluttering as they dissected the room. "There is Lena Hartley. Mrs." Gable whispered loudly enough to be heard in the next territory. "Still unmarried. It is unnatural. A girl her age living alone with her father, touching blood and bile all day. No wonder no decent man will have her. I heard she speaks their language." "Mrs." Higgins added, shuddering theatrically. "The savages. Imagine polluting your tongue with such grunts." Lena stood near the punch bowl, her spine rigid. She wore her best dress, a simple blue calico that was 3 years out of fashion, high at the neck and long at the sleeve. She felt like an imposter. These people spoke of civilization while plotting theft. They spoke of God while hating their neighbors. Miss Hartley. Lena suppressed a sigh and turned. Ethan Lowell stood there, holding 2 cups of punch. He was the son of the largest rancher in the territory, a man with broad shoulders, blonde hair, and a smile that suggested he had never been told no in his entire life. He was the catch of the county, the golden boy who was supposed to inherit the earth. "Mr. Lowell," Lena said, accepting the cup. "Please, call me Ethan. We have known each other since we were children." He stepped closer, invading her personal space with the confidence of ownership. "You look sensible tonight, Lena." "Sensible?" Lena raised an eyebrow. "Clean, tidy." Ethan gestured vaguely at her person. "Mother was saying just yesterday that you need a firm hand, someone to take you out of that gruesome clinic and put you in a proper home. A woman's place is making a house beautiful, not digging bullets out of drunkards." "I rather like digging bullets," Lena said coolly. "It requires precision, something often lacking in domestic duties." Ethan laughed, a booming sound that drew eyes. He did not listen. He never did. "You are funny, Lena. That is what I like about you. You have spirit. It will make breaking you to the bridle all the more rewarding." He meant it as a compliment. That was the horror of it. He saw her as a mare to be tamed, a wild thing to be broken until she fit the shape of his kitchen. "I am not a horse, Ethan," she said, setting the cup down. "And I have no intention of being bridled." She walked away before he could respond, ignoring the heat in her cheeks. She pushed through the double doors and out into the night air, needing to breathe. From the shadow of the church porch, she looked toward the main street. It was there that she saw him again, or rather, felt him. A lone rider was moving down the center of the dusty thoroughfare. He did not look at the church. He did not look at the saloon. He rode a massive bay stallion that stepped with silent, lethal grace. Kai Redhawk. Even in the dark, he was unmistakable. The stories about him were woven into the fabric of the town's fear. They said his mother was a Red Hawk princess and his father a white trapper who had vanished into the snow. They said he had the eyes of a wolf and the heart of a stone. They called him an outlaw because he refused to live on the reservation and refused to bow to the town. He rode with a languid, dangerous ease, his body moving in perfect rhythm with the animal beneath him. He wore buckskins that fit him like a second skin, darkened by wear and grease, and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low. A repeating rifle rested in the scabbard by his knee, and a heavy Colt revolver hung low on his hip. Lena had seen him only once before, from a distance, but the image had branded itself onto her memory. He had been sitting on his horse on a ridge, silhouetted against the setting sun. "He looks like sin on a saddle," she had thought then. The thought returned to her now, unbidden and terrifying. He was not handsome in the way Ethan was handsome. Ethan was a polished statue. Kai Redhawk was a raw element, fire and earth mixed with blood. As he passed the light of the general store, he turned his head slightly, beneath the brim of his hat. She caught the flash of eyes so dark they seemed to swallow the light. He looked toward the mountains, his expression unreadable, solitary, and devastatingly free. Lena shivered. It was not fear, though she told herself it should be. It was a recognition of something wild within herself that she had spent 25 years suppressing. While Lena battled her internal turmoil, a different kind of war was being planned in the smoke-choked office of Major Silas Crowley. The Major sat behind his mahogany desk, a glass of brandy in his hand. Bartholomew Pike, the railroad man, paced the floor, checking his gold pocket watch every 30 seconds. "The survey team cannot wait, Major," Pike said, his voice nasal and irritating. "New York is screaming for progress. Every day the tracks stop at the canyon is $1,000 lost." "Patience, Bartholomew," Crowley soothed, swirling his drink. "The Redhawks are stubborn. They cling to that treaty like a drowning man to a plank." "The treaty is a piece of paper," Pike snapped. "Precisely, and paper burns." Crowley leaned forward, the lamplight casting deep shadows in his eye sockets. "But we cannot just march in and slaughter them. Washington has gone soft. They want justifications. They want provocation. So provoke them. I am trying. Crowley smiled, a thin, reptile expression. But that half-breed, Kai, keeps intercepting my men before they can cause enough damage to start a real fight. And that doctor, Hartley, he is asking too many questions. He is documenting the discrepancies in the ration supplies. Pike stopped pacing. Hartley, the old drunk. He is not a drunk. He is a man with a conscience. Dangerous. Crowley finished his brandy. But do not worry. I have a plan for the Red Hawks. Tonight, we shake the anthill. By tomorrow morning, the town will be screaming for blood. And as for the doctor, he shrugged. Accidents happen in the Wild West every day. The night deepened. The church social ended, and Lena walked her father home, his arm heavy on her shoulder. He seemed frazzled, clutching his leather satchel tightly against his chest. I have the proof. Lena, he whispered as they reached the clinic. The supply manifests. They are starving the tribe intentionally to force them to sign the new land deal. I have the original numbers. Father, please, Lena hissed, looking up and down the empty street. Hide them. If Crowley knows, let him know. I am a man of medicine, but I am also a man of God. I will not watch genocide happen for the sake of a steam engine. He went to his study, locking the door. Lena went to her room but could not sleep. The air was too heavy, charged with static. It was 3 hours past midnight when the first gunshot echoed from the direction of the fort. Lena sat bolt upright in bed. Then came another crack, and another, the flat, ugly sound of rifles, distant shouting. A bugle call cut through the silence, frantic and sharp. She threw on her wrapper and rushed to the front room of the clinic. Her father was not there. His study door was still closed. She hesitated, hand on the knob, when a heavy thud against the front porch stopped her heart. It was the sound of a body falling. Lena grabbed the shotgun her father kept behind the counter, though she doubted she could use it on a person. She unbolted the front door and swung it open. A man lay on the planks of the porch. He was not white. He wore the fringed leggings and moccasins of the Red Hawk people. Blood slicked his side, black in the moonlight. Lena dropped the gun and fell to her knees beside him. He was young, barely 20, his face twisted in agony. "Help!" he gasped in the trade tongue. "I have you," Lena said, her training taking over. She dragged him inside, straining against his dead weight, and kicked the door shut. She hoisted him onto the examination table, her hands moving swiftly to cut away his shirt. The wound was in his abdomen, deep, bleeding sluggishly. "Father," she called out, but the study door remained shut. She did not have time to fetch him. She had to stop the bleeding. Lena lit the kerosene lamp and washed her hands in alcohol. The young warrior watched her with terrified eyes, gripping the edge of the table until his knuckles turned white. "Quiet now," she soothed, switching to his dialect, the words feeling strange but right on her tongue. "I am going to find the metal." "Hold still." She probed the wound. The boy screamed through gritted teeth, arching his back. Lena's fingers found the bullet lodged against a rib. With the forceps, she clamped down and pulled. It came out with a wet suction sound. Lena dropped it into the metal basin. Clink. She packed the wound with gauze and administered a dose of laudanum to ease his pain. Only when his breathing leveled out did she pick up the basin to clean it. She stopped. She held the lamp closer to the basin. The bullet was not the crude, hand-molded lead slug that the Red Hawk warriors used in their old trade muskets. It was a pristine, conical manufactured bullet, a .45 caliber round, standard issue for the United States Army, and the weapon of choice for wealthy men like Ethan Lowell. The warrior grabbed her wrist, his eyes feverish. "Not us," he rasped. "We did not attack. They shot, from the dark, men in soldier coats, but not soldiers." Lena stared at the bullet, then at the boy. The attack on the fort was a lie. Crowley's men had staged an attack on themselves, or perhaps shot into the air, while simultaneously hunting down Red Hawks to blame for it. She heard horses galloping down the street, shouts of men. "The savages hit the perimeter!" someone yelled outside. "Get the doctor, we have wounded men." Lena blew out the lamp, plunging the clinic into darkness. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She looked at the young warrior hiding in the shadows of her surgery. If they found him here, they would hang him without a trial. She moved to the window and peered through the slat of the blind. The sky toward the fort was glowing orange with fire. The town was waking up, fueled by fear and righteous anger. Lena looked toward her father's study door again. Why had he not come out? The silence from that room was suddenly louder than the chaos outside. A cold certainty settled in her stomach. The safety of her life, the boring, respectable life she had resented only hours ago, was gone. The storm had broken over Redemption Ridge, and she was standing in the center of the flood. She gripped the cold metal of the army bullet in her palm, squeezing until it hurt. They wanted a war. They wanted the land. And it seemed they did not care who they had to crush to get it. Lena Hartley took a breath, steeling herself. She would not be crushed. Not by the railroad, not by the major, and certainly not by the lie that was about to consume her world. The silence in the study was absolute, broken only by the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. It was a sound Lena Hartley had heard all her life, usually accompanied by the scratching of her father's pen or the turning of a page. Now, however, the silence was heavy, smelling of copper and burnt paper. Dr. Elias Hartley lay slumped over his mahogany desk. To the unobservant eye, it might have looked as though he had simply fallen asleep amidst his work. But Lena was not unobservant. She was a woman of science, trained by the man now cooling before her. She saw the unnatural angle of his neck. She saw the bruising blooming behind his ear, hidden by the silver hair. And she saw the chaos of the room. Drawers had been pulled out and dumped onto the Persian rug. Books were swept from the shelves, their spines cracked. The heavy iron safe in the corner stood wide open, its mouth gaping and empty. "Stroke," the coroner said an hour later. Standing in the doorway and wiping his hands on a handkerchief, he did not step inside. He did not check the pulse. He simply stated it with the flatness of a man reading a grocery list. A tragedy. The heart gives out when a man reaches 5 decades. "A stroke does not open a safe," Lena said, her voice trembling not with tears, but with a cold, vibrating rage. "A stroke does not tear through a ledger looking for evidence. He was murdered." Major Silas Crowley stepped out from behind the coroner. He filled the small hallway, his presence suffocating. "Miss Hartley, you are distraught. Grief makes the mind see phantoms. Your father was an old man under a great deal of strain. The mess. Likely he was searching for medication in a panic as the attack took him. He was confused, senile, perhaps." "He was the sharpest mind in this territory," Lena snapped, turning to face the major. "He was a stumbling block to progress," Crowley said softly, his voice dropping so only she could hear. Then he straightened and addressed the room at large. "We will handle the arrangements. You should rest. Miss Hartley, you are quite alone now." The threat hung in the air, more potent than the smell of death. "You are quite alone now." The funeral was a blur of black crepe and insincere condolences. Lena stood by the grave, dry-eyed, watching the red earth of Redemption Ridge swallow the only person who had ever understood her. She felt the eyes of the town on her back. They were not eyes of sympathy. They were the eyes of predators assessing a wounded animal. 2 days after the earth was packed down over Elias Hartley, the summons came. It was not a polite invitation to tea. It was a legal mandate delivered by the town sheriff, ordering her appearance at the town hall. When Lena arrived, shaking the dust from her skirts, she found she was not facing a judge, but a tribunal. The town council sat behind a long table draped in green felt. Major Crowley was there, flanked by the Reverend Thomas, the bank manager, Mr. Sterling, and 3 of the most formidable matrons of the church auxiliary. "Miss Hartley," Reverend Thomas began, folding his hands over his paunch, "we have asked you here to discuss your precarious situation." My situation is that I am grieving, Lena replied, standing tall in the center of the room. She refused to sit in the single wooden chair they had placed for her like a defendant's dock. Your situation? Mrs. Gable interrupted, fanning herself vigorously, is that you are a 25-year-old woman living alone in a house of questionable repute. It is a medical clinic, Lena said. It is a place where men come and go at all hours, Mrs. Gable sniffed, and where savages are treated with the same hands that touch decent folk. It was barely tolerated when the doctor was alive to supervise you. But now, a woman alone, dealing in blood and bodies. It is a moral hazard. It endangers the reputation of Redemption Ridge. Crowley leaned forward, the wood of the table creaking under his elbows. We have a responsibility to maintain order. Lena, with the railroad arriving and the tensions with the tribes rising, we cannot have a single woman acting as a lightning rod for trouble. The law is clear on matters of guardianship. I am of age, Lena stated. I require no guardian. The territory statutes disagree. Mr. Sterling, the banker, said, adjusting his spectacles. In the absence of a father or husband, and given the eccentric nature of your behavior, the council has the right to intervene for your own protection. We have declared you unfit to reside alone. The room seemed to tilt. Unfit. Hysteria. Crowley supplied the word smoothly. Grief-induced instability. We have two options. Miss Hartley, for your own good, of course. He held up 2 fingers. Option 1, you will be escorted tomorrow morning to the St. Jude Asylum for Women in the East. There, you can receive the rest and spiritual correction you desperately need. Lena felt the blood drain from her face. The asylum was a prison. Women went in and never came out. And option 2, she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Marriage, the Reverend beamed, as if offering her a piece of candy. Immediate marriage to a respectable citizen who can provide the guidance and discipline you lack. If you are under the cover of a husband, the town can rest easy. You cannot force me to marry. We can force you to the train station, Crowley said, his eyes cold and dead. The choice is yours. Lena, we have convened a special session at the courthouse in 1 hour. You will choose a husband from the eligible bachelors of this town, or you will pack your trunk for the asylum. The hour passed in a haze of panic. Lena paced the small holding room at the back of the courthouse, her mind racing like a trapped bird. This was the trap her father had feared. They wanted the land the clinic stood on. They wanted her silence regarding the falsified medical reports. And most of all, they wanted to break the last link between the town and the Red Hawk tribe. When the bailiff opened the door, the noise of the crowd hit her like a physical blow. The courthouse, which also served as the town meeting hall, was packed to the rafters. It seemed every man within a 10-mile radius had heard that the doctor's daughter was being auctioned off. The air was thick with the smell of unwashed bodies, tobacco smoke, and cruel anticipation. Lena walked down the center aisle, keeping her chin high, though her knees threatened to buckle. In the front row sat the eligible men. Ethan Lowell was there, preening in a new suit, looking for all the world like he'd already won the prize. Beside him sat the butcher, a man with hands permanently stained red, and the assistant clerk from the railroad office, a weasel of a man who stared at her chest. Order. The judge banged his gavel. He was a man owned by the railroad, bought and paid for by Bartholomew Pike's gold. We are here to settle the matter of Miss Lena Hartley's guardianship. Miss Hartley, have you made your decision? Will you accept the benevolence of the asylum, or will you fulfill your duty as a woman and take a husband? Lena stood before the bench. She looked at Ethan Lowell. He winked at her, a gesture of ownership that made her stomach churn. If she married him, she would be a bird in a gilded cage, her spirit crushed within a year. If she chose the asylum, she would be medicated into oblivion. The law states, Lena said, her voice ringing out clearly despite the dryness of her throat, that I may choose any unmarried man present to be my husband, provided he agrees. Is that correct? That is the custom, the judge said, bored. Though I hardly think you need to look past the front row. Mr. Lowell has been most generous in his offer. Lena turned away from the bench. She looked at the faces of the men in the room. Greed, lust, contempt. There was not a single face that held a shred of honor. She turned toward the open double doors at the back of the hall, seeking a breath of fresh air. And there she saw him. Outside, in the blinding glare of the afternoon sun, a group of soldiers was watering their horses. In the center of the group, a man sat on a black stallion. He was not a soldier. He was shackled. Heavy iron chains connected his wrists to the pommel of his saddle, and another chain ran from his ankles to the stirrups. He had been beaten. His lip was split, and a bruise darkened his cheekbone, but he sat with a spine of steel. It was Kai Redhawk. He was waiting for transport to the military prison, accused of the very raid Lena knew was a fabrication. He sat motionless, ignoring the soldiers who jeered at him. He looked at the courthouse, and for a second, his eyes met Lena's across the distance. He did not look like a prisoner. He looked like a king in exile. He looked dangerous, yes, but it was an honest danger. The men in this room were wolves in sheep's clothing, hiding their malice behind Bibles and bank accounts. Kai Redhawk wore his nature openly. The phrase from that night on the porch returned to her, striking her with the force of a revelation. He looked like sin on a saddle, but sin was honest. Sin did not pretend to be virtue. And in that moment, Lena realized that the only way to survive a town built on lies was to embrace the one truth they all feared. "Miss Hartley," the judge pressed. "Mr. Lowell is waiting." Lena turned back to the judge. A strange calm settled over her. "You said I may choose any man present, within reason. Miss Hartley, any man here?" "He is here," Lena said. She pointed a steady finger toward the open doors, directly at the man in chains outside. "I choose him." The judge blinked, confused. He craned his neck to see. "Who, the soldier?" "No," Lena said, her voice finding its iron. "The prisoner. I chose Kai Redhawk." For 3 seconds, there was absolute silence. Then, the room exploded. It was a wall of sound. Women shrieked. Men shouted curses. Ethan Lowell jumped to his feet, his face turning a mottled purple. "She is mad. She has lost her mind." Major Crowley stood up slowly, his face draining of color before flushing with a violent rage. This was not in the plan. The daughter of the man he murdered marrying the scapegoat he intended to hang it was a disaster. It united the two things he needed to keep separate. Order. The judge hammered his gavel until the handle nearly snapped. Order in this court. When the noise subsided to an angry murmur, the judge glared at Lena. "This is a mockery. That man is a criminal. He is a savage awaiting execution." "He is a man awaiting trial," Lena corrected. "And under the law, until he is convicted. He is a citizen of this territory. He is present. He is unmarried. And I choose him." "I will not allow it," Ethan shouted. "You gave me a choice," Lena said, turning to face the mob. "You said any man. You did not specify skin color. You did not specify social standing. You tried to trap me, and now you do not like that I have found the door." Crowley walked to the front of the room. He looked at Lena with eyes that promised retribution, but he was a calculating man. He looked at the crowd, then at the prisoner outside. If he denied this, he broke his own law. If he allowed it, he handed Lena a death sentence of a different kind. A white woman marrying a hostile would be a pariah. She would be destroyed by society faster than he could destroy her himself, and it would give him the perfect excuse to paint the Redhawks as corrupters of white virtue. "Bring the prisoner in," Crowley commanded. 2 soldiers dragged Kai Redhawk off his horse and marched him into the hall. The chains rattled like the bells of doom. The crowd parted, recoiling as if he were contagious. Kai walked with a limp, but his head was high. He stopped before the bench, looking at Lena with a mixture of confusion and intense calculation. He smelled of horse sweat, leather, and blood. To Lena, it smelled like freedom compared to the lavender water of the council. "Kai Redhawk," the judge spat. This woman, Miss Hartley, has exercised her right under the Guardianship Act to select a husband. She has selected you." Kai looked at Lena. His eyes were dark, fathomless pools. He did not speak. He simply studied her face, searching for the madness everyone else claimed she possessed. He saw only desperation and a fierce, trembling resolve. "If you agree," the judge continued, a sneer curling his lip, "the charges against you will be suspended pending a probationary period. You will be released into her custody. If you refuse, you ride to the hanging tree at Fort Winslow in the morning." Kai looked at the noose awaiting him in the future, and then at the woman standing beside him. He understood the game instantly. She was drowning, and she had grabbed the only piece of driftwood she saw a shark. "Why?" Kai asked. His voice was rough, like gravel grinding together. It was the first word he had spoken. "Because I need a husband to stay out of the asylum," Lena whispered, low enough that only he could hear. "And because you look like the only man here who might actually keep his word." A flicker of something passed through Kai's eyes. Amusement, respect. It was gone too fast to tell. He turned to the judge. "If this is the only way to save a life, then I accept." The wedding took place 10 minutes later. It was the bleakest ceremony in the history of the territory. There were no flowers. There was no music. There was only the scratch of the pen on the license and the sullen muttering of the witness. A drunkard pulled in from the street because no respectable citizen would sign the paper. Lena's hand shook as she held Kai's. His skin was warm, rough, and calloused. He was still wearing the manacles on his wrists. When the priest asked for the ring, there was none. Kai looked at her, then reached down to the leather thong around his neck. He pulled it off. On it hung a simple washer made of iron. He placed it in her palm. It was cold and heavy. "With this, I thee wed," he murmured. "I pronounce you man and wife," the priest said, looking as though he might vomit. "May God have mercy on your souls." As soon as the words were spoken, Crowley stepped forward. He had regained his composure. He had a new plan. "Congratulations," Crowley said, his voice dripping with venom. "However, the law requires that a newlywed couple must prove the stability of their union, especially given the questionable nature of the groom." "What do you mean?" Lena asked, clutching the iron washer. "You cannot stay in town," Crowley declared. "The citizens will not tolerate a hostile living among them, and we cannot have you running off to the reservation to plot treason." He motioned to the map on the wall. "There is an old government trading outpost in the Dead Man's Wash. It is abandoned. It lies exactly between the town and the Red Hawk lands." Crowley smiled, a shark smelling blood. "You will live there. For 3 months, a probation period. You, Mr. Red Hawk, will abide by every letter of the law. You will report to the marshal every week. You, Mrs. Red Hawk, will fulfill your duties as a wife and ensure your husband's civilization." He leaned in close, invading their space. "If there is a single incident, if you try to run, if there is any disorder, the marriage is annulled. You, Kai, will be hanged immediately. And you, Lena, will be on the next train to the asylum." 3 months, Lena repeated, feeling the trap snap shut around her ankle. 3 months in the desert. Crowley agreed. "Survival of the fittest. Marshal, unlock the groom. Let us see how long domestic bliss lasts in hell." The soldier unlocked Kai's chains. They fell to the floor with a heavy crash. Kai rubbed his wrists, the red skin raw and angry. He did not look at Crowley. He looked at Lena. "Get your things. Wife," Kai said. "We have a long ride." Lena looked at the stranger she had just married. He was tall, scared, and lethal. The town hated him. The army wanted him dead. And now, he was the only thing standing between her and oblivion. She turned and walked out of the courthouse, her hand resting tentatively on the arm of the outlaw who looked like sin on a saddle, leaving the murmuring hate of Redemption Ridge behind her. The buckboard wagon, a rickety contraption that the town council had clearly dragged out of a scrap heap, groaned in protest with every rotation of its mismatched wheels. The road to Dead Man's Wash was not so much a road as a scar cut into the red earth, winding through scrub brush and cacti that stood like silent sentinels in the shimmering heat. Lena Hartley sat on the hard wooden bench, her spine stiff, her hands folded tightly in her lap to stop them from shaking. Beside her, Kai Redhawk held the reins. He had not spoken a word since they left the courthouse. He drove with a casual competence, his eyes scanning the horizon, the ridgeline, the shadows of the rocks. He was no longer shackled, but the red bands of raw skin around his wrists were a screaming reminder of how they had arrived at this moment. The sun was a physical weight, pressing down on Lena's bonnet. She looked at her husband. Husband. The word tasted like ashen iron. He was looking straight ahead, his profile sharp and unforgiving against the glare. "Is it far?" Lena asked. Her voice sounded thin, swallowed instantly by the vast silence of the territory. Kai did not look at her. "Far enough that no one hears you scream. Close enough that the army can ride out in an hour if they see smoke." It was a grim geography. They crested a rise, and the outpost came into view. Outpost was a generous term. It was a ruin, a low, adobe structure with a sagging porch, a corral that looked like a strong wind would flatten it, and a windmill that turned lazily, groaning a metal song of neglect. It sat in a depression in the land, a bowl of heat where the shadows lengthened early. Kai pulled the horses to a halt. Dust billowed around them, coating Lena's throat. He jumped down, his movements fluid despite the limp he tried to hide, and walked to the front door. He inspected the lock, a rusted padlock that looked as if it had not been touched in 10 years. "Home," he said, the sarcasm dry as the dirt beneath his boots. He struck the lock with the butt of his revolver. It shattered. He kicked the door open, and a cloud of stale air and disturbed bats flew out. Lena climbed down from the wagon. She refused to wait for him to help her. She was a doctor's daughter. She had seen death, disease, and the worst of human nature. She would not be defeated by a dusty shack. She gathered her skirts and marched up the steps, stepping past him into the gloom. The interior smelled of rat droppings and abandonment. A scorpion skittered across the floorboards, disappearing into a crack. There was a single room, a stone fireplace, and a back room that might have once been a storage closet. "There is a broom in the wagon," Lena said, turning to face him. Her voice was steady. "And a bucket." Kai leaned against the doorframe, thumb hooked in his gun belt. He watched her with an expression that sat somewhere between curiosity and disbelief. "You expect to clean it." "I expect to live in it," Lena retorted. "And I will not live in filth. If we are to survive 3 months without killing each other, we will do it with a clean floor." Kai stared at her for a long moment. Then he gave a single, short nod. "I will check the well. If there is no water, a clean floor will not matter." He turned and walked out into the blinding light. Lena let out a breath she did not know she had been holding. She stripped off her fine town gloves, ruined now anyway, and went to the wagon to fetch the broom. The first 3 days were a war against the elements. The desert did not welcome them. It tested them. The heat was the first enemy. By noon, the sun turned the adobe shack into an oven. Lena learned quickly that the heavy petticoats and corsets of Redemption Ridge were a death sentence here. She discarded the layers, wearing only her chemise and a simple work dress, rolling her sleeves up to her elbows. Her skin, already sun-kissed, turned a deeper shade of bronze. She scrubbed. She hauled water from the well, which, thankfully, still held a muddy but drinkable liquid deep in the earth. She beat the dust out of the moth-eaten mattresses they had found in the back room. Kai fought his own battles. He did not speak much, communicating mostly in nods or grunts. He worked on the corral, replacing rotted beams with scavenged wood. He fixed the roof where the shingles had blown away. He hunted, disappearing into the twilight and returning with a jackrabbit or a brace of quail, which he skinned with surgical precision. He watched her, though. Lena could feel his eyes on her when she was bent over the wash basin or struggling to chop firewood. It was not a lecherous gaze. Like the men in town, it was the gaze of a man watching a strange animal. waiting to see if it would bite or flee. "You work hard for a white woman," he said on the third evening. They were eating roasted rabbit by the fire, the only light in the vast darkness. Lena wiped grease from her fingers. "I worked for my father. Medicine is not a profession for the lazy." "Your father was a good man," Kai said. It was the first time he had acknowledged their connection. "He set my arm once, 2 years ago. He did not ask for money. He asked for stories. He believed understanding people was as important as curing them," Lena said softly. She looked at Kai across the flames. The firelight danced on his high cheekbones, softening the harsh lines of his face. "Why did you agree to this to the marriage?" Kai took a slow drink from his canteen. "The rope is itchy. I prefer the open air." "Is that the only reason? Does there need to be another?" He stood up, the conversation clearly over. "Sleep inside. Bar the door. I will sleep on the porch." "You do not have to," Lena said, the words slipping out before she could check them. "There is room near the hearth." "I am an outlaw." "Lena," he said, using her name for the first time. It sounded strange and intimate in the quiet room. "And you are a lady of reputation. If the marshal comes and finds us in the same room, he will say I forced you, and then he will hang me." He walked out, closing the door behind him. Lena listened as he dragged a heavy bench across the entrance, not to keep her in, she realized. But to keep everything else out, she lay on the mattress, staring at the ceiling. Outside, the coyotes began to sing, a high, yipping chorus that sounded like laughter. She felt small. She felt terrified, but as she listened to the slow, rhythmic breathing of the man sleeping just on the other side of the wood, she realized she felt safe. The lesson came on the 5th day. The woodpile was dwindling, and Lena decided to gather kindling from the scrub brush near the dry creek bed. The morning air was deceptively cool, and she was lost in thought, worrying about the dwindling flower supply. She saw a perfect piece of dried mesquite and reached for it. The sound was distinct, a dry, terrifying rattle that vibrated in her very bones. Lena froze. Her hand was inches from the wood. Coiled beneath the shadow of a rock was a diamondback rattlesnake, thick as her arm, its triangular head drawn back to strike. Panic seized her. Her instinct screamed at her to run, to jerk her hand back, but her muscles were locked in paralysis. The snake's tongue flicked out, tasting her fear. Bang! The gunshot was so loud it shattered the morning silence like glass. The snake's head disintegrated in a spray of red mist. The body thrashed wildly, coiling and uncoiling in death throes. Lena stumbled back, gasping, her heart hammering against her ribs. She looked up to see Kai standing 10 feet away, his revolver smoking in his hand. He had drawn and fired in a heartbeat. He holstered the gun and walked over to her. He did not look angry, but his face was grim. "Show me your hand," he commanded. Lena held out her trembling hand. He did not take it. He leaned in, inspecting her arm, her wrist, ensuring no fangs had grazed her. He was close enough that she could smell the gunpowder and the sage on his skin. I didn't see it," she stammered. "You were looking at the wood," Kai said. His voice was low, intense. "In this land, you do not look at the prize. You look at the shadow. You look at what lives in the shadow." He kicked the dead snake away with his boot. Then, he looked her in the eye. "One wrong step. Lena, one moment of forgetting where you are, and you are dead. The desert does not care that you are kind. It does not care that you are innocent. It eats the careless." "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Do not be sorry," he said. "Be alive." He turned and walked back toward the corral, his limp slightly more pronounced. Lena watched him go. He had saved her life without hesitation. He was a killer, yes. The town had told her that, but he killed to protect. That night, Lena could not sleep. The image of the snake and the gun played over in her mind, but more than that. She thought of the way Kai had looked at her. He had not mocked her fear. He had taught her. She rose and went to the window. The moon was full, painting the desert in silver and blue. Kai was sitting on the edge of the porch, whittling a piece of wood. He was not sleeping. He was guarding. Kai felt her gaze. He stopped whittling and looked up at the stars. He was a man caught between two worlds. His mother's people called him a brother, but looked at his blue eyes with suspicion. The white men called him a savage. And now, he was the husband of a white woman who smelled like lavender and soap. Even out here in the dust, he should hate her. She represented everything the railroad and the army were trying to force upon the land civilization. Order, fences. But when he had seen her facing down that snake, he hadn't seen a white woman. He had seen a spirit that refused to break. He was sin on a saddle. He knew what the town called him. He was unworthy of the soft things in life. But as he sat there in the cold moonlight, gun on his hip, he swore to the spirits of his ancestors that nothing would harm her while he drew breath. Not the snakes, not the major, not the railroad. The rain came a week later, a violent, unexpected torrent that the natives called a male rain. It slammed into the earth with the force of a stampede. Thunder shook the adobe walls, and lightning turned the night into a strobing nightmare. The roof, neglected for years, began to fail. "The tarp!" Kai shouted over the roar of the wind. In the shed, Lena grabbed the oilcloth tarp they had used to cover the supplies in the wagon. The water was pouring in through a gap near the chimney, threatening to flood the hearth and soak their bedding. Kai dragged the table under the leak and jumped up. "Hand it to me!" Lena climbed up beside him. The space was cramped near the ceiling. Water poured down on them, cold and relentless. Kai held one corner of the heavy canvas, struggling to wedge it into the beams. "Hold this side," he yelled. Lena gripped the canvas, her fingers slipping. She pushed with all her strength, jamming the fabric into the gap. Kai hammered a wedge of wood into place to hold it. They worked in a frenzy, shoulders bumping, hands brushing. They were soaked to the bone, their clothes clinging to them like second skins. Finally, the flow of water slowed to a trickle, then stopped, diverted to the outside wall. They stood there on the table, breathing hard in the sudden quiet of the room. The only sound was the rain drumming on the roof and the crackle of the fire that was fighting to stay lit. Lena pushed wet hair out of her eyes. She looked at Kai. His buckskin shirt was plastered to his chest, revealing the hard definition of his muscles and the roadmap of scars that crossed his skin. Water dripped from the brim of his hat, running down his nose. He was looking at her, too. The thin cotton of her nightdress was translucent with water. She knew she should be ashamed. She knew she should cover herself, but she could not move. The air between them changed. It was no longer just the adrenaline of the storm. It was something heavier, hotter. It was the electricity of two bodies that had been circling each other in the dark, suddenly thrown together in the light. Kai reached out. His hand hovered near her face. For a heartbeat, Lena thought he was going to kiss her. Her breath hitched. She wanted him to, God help her. She wanted the outlaw to touch her. His fingers brushed a droplet of water from her cheek. His touch was incredibly gentle, a stark contrast to the violence of the storm outside. His eyes dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes. The hunger in them was raw, but there was also a terrible restraint. "You are cold," he said, his voice rough. "I am not," Lena whispered. She was burning. Kai's jaw tightened. He stepped back, the moment shattering like a dropped glass. He jumped down from the table and offered her a hand. "Dry yourself," he said, turning his back to her. "I will check the horses. The thunder makes them crazy." He walked out into the rain, leaving Lena standing on the table, shivering, her heart pounding a rhythm that had nothing to do with fear. 2 days after the storm, the marshal arrived. He rode up with 2 deputies, the hooves of their horses churning the mud that was rapidly drying back into dust. Marshal Earp. No relation to the famous ones, he liked to say. Though he lacked their integrity, was a man with a belly full of beer and pockets full of railroad money. "Mrs. Red Hawk," he called out, not dismounting. He spat a stream of tobacco juice onto the clean patch of land Lena had just swept. Checking on the happy couple, Lena walked out to the porch, drying her hands on her apron. Kai was in the corral, breaking a wild mustang he had caught. He stopped, watching the lawmen with the stillness of a predator. "We are well, Marshal," Lena said coldly. "Are you?" The marshal leered at her. "You look tired. Ma'am, living with a savage must be taxing. If he is mistreating you, all you have to do is say the word. We can end this little experiment right now." "My husband treats me with respect," Lena said, emphasizing the word husband, "which is more than I can say for some men in town." The marshal's eyes narrowed. "Don't get too comfortable. Miss Lena, 3 months is a long time. Accidents happen." He turned his horse, signaling his men. "Watch him. Boys, a leopard doesn't change his spots." They rode off, laughing. Lena watched them go until they were specks on the horizon. She turned to go back inside, but something caught her eye near the well. The ground there was still soft from the rain. There were boot prints. She walked over to inspect them. They were fresh, but Kai wore moccasins, soft-soled and silent. The marshal and his men had stayed by the porch. These prints were deep, made by a heavy boot with a distinct heel, an army-issue boot. And they were not just near the well. They circled the back of the shack, near the window where she slept. Someone had been here last night. Someone had been watching them while the storm raged. Kai appeared beside her, silent as a ghost. He looked down at the tracks. His face hardened, the mask of the stoic warrior slipping to reveal a flash of cold, deadly anger. "Crowley," he said, "the name a curse." "They are watching us," Lena said, a chill running down her spine that the desert sun could not chase away. "No," Kai said, kneeling to touch the edge of the print. "They are not just watching. They are hunting." He stood up and looked toward the red cliffs in the distance. "They want us to run. They want us to break. They want a reason to kill me and take you." He turned to Lena, and for the first time, he took her hand in his. His grip was strong, calloused, and reassuring. "We will not give it to them," he vowed. Lena squeezed his hand back. The line had been drawn in the sand. The probation was a lie. The game was rigged. But as she looked at the man beside her, the man who had killed a snake to save her and walked away to save her honor, she knew one thing for certain. She was done playing by their rules. The journey to the Red Hawk village took them through a landscape that seemed to defy the laws of the territory. While Redemption Ridge was a place of flat, baking heat and colorless dust, the entrance to the ancestral lands was a cathedral of stone. Red sandstone spires rose hundreds of feet into the air, creating a labyrinth of shadow and light that cooled the skin and quieted the soul. Kai rode the stallion, and Lena rode a mare they had bartered for at a nearby homestead. They moved in silence, but it was not the tense silence of their arrival at the outpost. It was a companionable quiet, born of shared labor and the unspoken bond of survival. "They will not hurt you," Kai said as they rounded a bend in the canyon. "But they will look. Do not look away." "I am not ashamed," Lena replied, straightening her spine. "And I am not afraid." Kai glanced at her, a flicker of approval in his dark eyes. "Good. Fear smells like vinegar to them." The village appeared suddenly, nestled in a verdant valley fed by a spring that tumbled down the rock face. It was nothing like the chaotic, filthy encampments described by the Reverend in his Sunday sermons. It was an orderly circle of teepees made of painted hide, surrounding a central fire that smoked lazily into the blue sky. Lena saw women weaving baskets with deft, artistic fingers. She saw old men smoking pipes, their faces maps of the last century. And she saw children laughing, running, playing a game with a hoop and a stick. They stopped when they saw Kai, rushing forward with shouts of joy, only to falter when they saw the white woman riding beside him. The atmosphere shifted. Suspicion, heavy and cold, descended on the clearing. Warriors with stone-faced expressions stepped forward, hands resting near their knives. To them, Lena was not a healer. She was the face of the encroaching railroad, the daughter of the people who stole their water. Kai raised a hand, speaking a sharp phrase in his native tongue. The warriors did not back down, but they paused. From the largest tent, an elderly woman emerged. She was small, shrunken by time, but she moved with the authority of a matriarch. Her hair was white braids, and her eyes were sharp as obsidian. This was the elder mother. She was not Kai's biological mother. That tragic figure was long dead, but she was the mother of the tribe's spirit. She walked up to Lena's horse. Lena dismounted, her boots kicking up small clouds of dust. She stood before the old woman, feeling toweringly tall and clumsy. The elder mother studied Lena's face for a long time. Then, she reached out a hand that looked like dried parchment and placed it on Lena's forehead. She muttered something soft, a sound like wind in the dry grass. "She sees your heart," Kai translated, his voice low. "She says it is red, not white." Lena exhaled, realizing she had been holding her breath. "Thank you," she whispered. That night, around the central fire, the barriers began to crumble. The tribe did not embrace her fully, but they tolerated her presence because the elder mother had sanctioned it. They ate roasted venison and flatbread, the smoke stinging Lena's eyes in a pleasant way. "Why do you live between worlds?" Lena asked Kai. They were sitting slightly apart from the main circle. "You could live here. You would be safe." Kai stared into the flames. "I am not safe here. My blood is tainted. My father was a trapper who passed through, took what he wanted and left. To the white men, I am a savage. To some of the traditionalists here, I am a reminder of weakness." He picked up a stone, turning it over in his fingers. 5 years ago, there was a raid, soldiers and mercenaries working together. They hit the winter camp. His voice went flat, devoid of emotion, which made the story more terrifying. They killed 20 people, women, children, and a girl named Aponi. She was the morning sun to me. Lena reached out, her hand hovering over his arm before resting gently on his sleeve. "Kai, I killed the men who did it." Kai said, "3 of them. I hunted them for 2 months. That is when the town started calling me an outlaw, because I did not wait for their law to give me justice." He looked at her, his eyes raw. "I bring death. Lena, I do not deserve to sit by this fire, and I certainly do not deserve a wife who saves lives instead of taking them." "You did not choose death," Lena said firmly. "It was forced upon you, just as this marriage was forced upon us. But we are here, and we are alive." The elder mother approached them then, carrying a weathered leather satchel. She handed it to Lena with a solemn nod. "Your father," Kai said, recognizing the bag. "He left it with her on his last visit. He said to give it to you if the darkness came." Lena opened the satchel with trembling fingers. Inside was a thick notebook, bound in black oilcloth. She opened it to the light of the fire. It was filled with Elias Hartley's jagged handwriting. She read the first page, and her blood ran cold. June 4th, 1875. Meeting with Major Crowley and Mr. Pike. Pike offered me $5,000 to declare the smallpox outbreak in the valley. There is no smallpox. He wants a quarantine to legally bar the Red Hawks from the water source. She turned the pages. It was all there. Dates, amounts, names. Elias had documented every bribe, every falsified report, every shipment of illegal weapons to the mercenaries. And folded in the back was a map. It showed the proposed railroad line. It did not go around the reservation as the treaty promised. It went straight through the heart of the valley, erasing the village where they now sat. "He knew," Lena whispered, tears pricking her eyes. "He knew they were going to kill him." "This is not just corruption," Kai said, tracing the red line on the map with his finger. "This is war. If this gets out, the government in Washington will have to intervene. The treaty stands unless there is a rebellion. That is why Crowley is staging the attacks." Lena realized. "He needs a rebellion to void the treaty." They looked at each other. The weight of the notebook was heavier than lead. It was the key to saving the valley, but it was also a death warrant for anyone holding it. "We have to take this to the military tribunal in Santa Fe," Lena said. "To the general, not Crowley. Crowley will have men watching every road." Kai warned, "If we leave this valley, we are targets." "We are already targets," Lena said, closing the book. "At least now we have a weapon." The ride back to the outpost the next day was tense, the air thick with unspoken fears. They took a single horse to move faster, leaving the mare behind. Lena sat behind Kai, her arms wrapped around his waist, her chest pressed against his back. The physical contact was maddening. Every movement of the stallion caused their bodies to shift against each other. Lena could feel the heat radiating from him, the hard muscles of his abdomen under her hands. She rested her cheek against his shoulder, smelling the wood smoke and leather that was his scent. She thought of the first time she saw him sin on a saddle. He was still that. He was dangerous, scared, and lived by violence. But he was also the man who mourned a dead girl, who respected an old woman, and who was currently acting as a human shield for her. The sun began to set, painting the desert in bruised purples and bloody oranges. "Hold on," Kai said suddenly, his voice tight. Before Lena could ask why, a gunshot cracked through the air. Dust kicked up inches from the horse's hooves. Kai spurred the stallion, and the beast surged forward. Two riders emerged from the rocks above the pass, rifles raised. They were not soldiers. They wore dusters and masks, mercenaries. "Keep your head down," Kai shouted. He drew his revolver with his right hand while steering with his left. He fired back bang, bang, forcing the attackers to duck behind the boulders. The stallion galloped through the narrow chute of the canyon, hooves striking sparks against the stone. Another bullet whizzed past Lena's ear, close enough to hear the angry buzz like a hornet. She buried her face in Kai's coat, gripping him so tight her fingers ached. Kai turned in the saddle and fired a final shot. One of the pursuers' horses reared. Throwing its rider, the other pulled up, unwilling to chase them into the open desert where Kai's range would be superior. They rode hard for another 5 miles until the outpost appeared in the twilight. When they reached the yard, Kai practically pulled Lena off the horse. "Are you hit?" he demanded, his hands checking her arms, her shoulders, frantically searching for blood. "No, I am fine. Kai, I am fine," Lena gasped, breathless from the ride and the fear. He dragged her into the shack, kicking the door shut and barring it. The adrenaline was crashing through both of them, a tidal wave of relief and terror. The room was dark, lit only by the slivers of moonlight coming through the shutters. Kai backed her against the wall. He was breathing hard, his chest heaving. "They were waiting. They knew we were coming back. We are alive," Lena said. Her hands came up to cup his face. His skin was hot, dusted with grit. He looked at her, his eyes wild. The restraint he had shown for weeks, the careful distance he had maintained to protect her reputation and his own heart, snapped like a dry twig. "You could have died," he growled. "I didn't," she whispered. He kissed her. It was not a gentle kiss. It was desperate, fueled by the brush with death and the weeks of proximity. His mouth was hard on hers, demanding and claiming. Lena responded with equal force, her fingers tangling in his dark hair, pulling him closer. This was the sin she had feared. It was the salvation she had craved. It was the feeling of being completely, devastatingly alive. His hands moved to her waist, pulling her hips against his. Lena felt the cold metal of his gun belt pressing into her, a reminder of the violence outside, contrasting with the heat of his body. There were no soft words, no poetic declarations. There was only the frantic need to affirm life in the face of death. He lifted her, and she wrapped her legs around him, burying her face in the crook of his neck. They moved toward the mattress in the corner, a tangle of limbs and breath. The door was barred. The world outside was hunting them, but in that small, dark room, for the first time, they belonged only to each other. Peace was a fleeting luxury. 2 nights later, the devil came knocking. His name was Duke Malone. He was not a screamer like the town drunks, nor a posturing fool like Ethan Lowell. He was a professional. He killed men for money, and he was very expensive because he never missed. He did not kick down the door. He waited until the moon was behind a cloud and threw a lit torch onto the porch roof. The dry thatch caught fire instantly. "Fire!" Kai roared, waking instantly from a light doze. He grabbed his rifle and shoved Lena toward the back window. "Go get to the rocks. I am not leaving you," Lena shouted. coughing as smoke began to curl under the door. "This is not a debate." Kai grabbed her arm, his grip bruising. "Go!" He kicked the back shutter open. Lena scrambled out into the dirt, but she did not run to the rocks. She crawled around the side of the water trough, grabbing the shotgun she had insisted on keeping loaded since the snake incident. "In front of the house," a voice called out. "Come on out, Red Hawk. The Major wants your head. The wife can stay inside and roast, or she can come out and watch. Makes no difference to me." Kai kicked the front door open and rolled out onto the porch, firing his Winchester from the hip. Crack, crack, crack. Duke Malone was behind the corral fence. He returned fire with a calm, rhythmic precision. A bullet tore a splinter of wood from the post inches from Kai's face. Kai was pinned down, flames roaring above him. An enemy with a superior angle in front of him. Malone stood up to take the killing shot. Boom! The blast came from the side. Lena, resting the shotgun on the edge of the trough, fired both barrels. The spread of buckshot was wide at that distance, but it peppered the fence and the dirt around Malone, forcing him to dive for cover. One pellet grazed his cheek, drawing a line of blood. "What the hell?" Malone grunted. He hadn't expected the doctor's daughter to be armed, let alone shooting. Kai used the distraction. He sprinted from the burning porch to the cover of the wagon, firing as he moved. Now Malone was flanked. He had Kai on one side and an angry woman with a shotgun on the other. He touched his bleeding cheek, looked at the burning roof which was failing to ignite the main adobe structure, and chuckled darkly. "All right," he called out, his voice calm. "I know when the odds have turned." He holstered his gun and backed away into the darkness, fading away as if he were part of the night. "You fight well, Red Hawk, and the lady. She is a surprise, I will give you that." The sound of hoofbeats faded into the distance. Kai and Lena spent the next hour dousing the porch fire with precious water from the well. When the last ember was out, they sat on the ground, soot-stained and exhausted. "He will be back," Kai said, wiping ash from his forehead. "That was Duke Malone. He does not give up on a contract." "He was not expecting us to fight together," Lena said. Her shoulder ached from the recoil of the shotgun, but she felt a strange, fierce pride. "You should have run," Kai said, but there was no heat in his voice. He reached out and took her hand, his thumb tracing the knuckles. "You are a foolish woman." "I am a married woman," Lena corrected. "And I protect what is mine." The net was tightening. A week later, a sympathetic ranch hand, one of the few whose child Elias had saved from fever, dropped a crumpled newspaper by the well while watering his horse. Lena smoothed it out on the table. The headline screamed, "Railroad Gala set for 1st of next month. Governor to attend." 3 weeks, Lena said, her face pale. "They are advancing the schedule." Below that was a wanted poster. Kai Redhawk, wanted dead or alive. Reward increased to $1,000. And below that, a smaller notice, doctor's daughter believed kidnapped by hostile. Reward for her safe return. "They are spinning the story," Kai said, sharpening his knife with a rhythmic shh sound. "If I bring you back, I will hang. If I stay here, they send an army. If I run, they burn the village." "We cannot run," Lena said. She stood up, pacing the small room. She was no longer the woman who fretted about tea sets. She wore Kai's spare buckskin shirt because her dress was torn. Her hair was in a braid. She looked like a part of the land. "We have the book," she said. "If we can get this book to the governor at that gala, before he signs the land grant, Crowley is finished. To do that, we have to get onto a train guarded by the entire garrison," Kai pointed out. "It is suicide. It is justice," Lena said. "Teach me to shoot the rifle. The shotgun is too clumsy." Kai looked at her. He saw the resolve in her eyes. It mirrored his own. "At dawn," he said. For the next 2 weeks, the outpost became a training camp. Kai taught her how to hold the Winchester, how to breathe out before squeezing the trigger, and how to lead a moving target. Lena had steady hands from surgery. She learned fast. She learned to reload on the move. She learned to use a knife. She healed his wounds, and he hardened her spirit. They were forging themselves into a weapon. But tragedy strikes when confidence is highest. 2 days before they planned to leave for the interception, they ran low on antiseptic. Kai's leg, grazed in the fight with Malone, was showing signs of infection. "I have to go to the edge of town," Lena insisted. "There is a cache of supplies my father kept in the old root cellar behind the church. I can get in and out before dawn." "It is too dangerous," Kai argued. "If that infection spreads, you cannot ride. If you cannot ride, we cannot stop the train. I will be a ghost. Kai, I promise." She left on the mare while Kai was feverish, sleeping heavily due to the infection. It was a mistake. Lena made it to the root cellar. She retrieved the carbolic acid and bandages. She was mounting her horse, hidden in the shadows of the alley, when a figure stepped out from behind the woodpile. It was Duke Malone. He didn't draw a gun. He just stepped forward and grabbed the bridle of her horse with one hand, calm as a man buying a newspaper. "Morning, Mrs. Redhawk," he drawled. "I figured you would need medicine eventually. Infection sets in fast in this heat." Lena reached for the revolver at her belt. But Malone was faster. He simply reached up and plucked it from her holster before her hand closed on the grip. Now, he chided, pocketing the gun. "No need for noise. The Major wants you back, unharmed, if possible." "He will kill Kai," Lena hissed. "Likely," Malone shrugged. "But that is the job. Come on down, ma'am. Do not make me tie you to the saddle." Lena looked at him. She saw the weary professionalism in his eyes. He was not cruel, but he was immovable. She dismounted slowly. "You are on the wrong side." "Mr. Malone," she said. "The side that pays is the right side, ma'am," he replied, gesturing for her to walk ahead of him toward the marshal's office. Kai woke up when the sun was high. The fever had broken, leaving him weak but clear-headed. "Lena." The silence of the shack was absolute. He stood up, stumbling slightly, and went outside. The mare was gone. The wagon was there. He walked to the dust near the gate. He saw the tracks of the mare leaving, and he saw something else. A small piece of blue ribbon that Lena used to tie her hair. It was lying in the dirt, trampled. She had gone for the medicine. She had not come back. Kai went back inside. He looked at the empty room. He looked at the notebook sitting on the table. She had left it behind for safekeeping. A cold, terrible calm settled over him. It was the calm of the wolf that had stopped running and turned to face the hunters. He picked up the notebook and tucked it into his shirt. He strapped on his gun belt, checking the loads. He took his rifle. He walked out to the stallion, pulling himself into the saddle despite the pain in his leg. "They took her," he whispered to the wind. He turned the horse toward Redemption Ridge. He was done hiding. He was done with probation. He was done with the laws written by thieves. Sin was coming back to town, and this time, he was bringing hell with him. The room Major Silas Crowley had detained Lena in was not a prison cell, but in many ways, it was worse. It was a guest suite in the officers' quarters, furnished with heavy velvet drapes that shut out the light and air. The door was locked from the outside, and a guard stood posted in the hallway. Lena sat in a high-backed chair, her hands folded in her lap to hide their trembling. She had been here for 2 days, 2 days of polite meals delivered on silver trays, 2 days of Crowley visiting to torment her with his voice, smooth as oil and twice as flammable. The lock turned, and Crowley entered. He was dressed in his dress uniform, gold braid gleaming on his shoulder. He looked like a hero. He looked like a liar. "The day has arrived, my dear," Crowley said, removing his white gloves. "The train is fueled. The governor is en route, and your carriage awaits." "You cannot keep me here forever," Lena said, her voice steady. "People will ask questions. The marshal?" "The local marshal is bought," Crowley interrupted with a dismissive wave. "And as for the federal marshal passing through, he will be too busy shaking hands with the governor to notice a wayward woman being escorted to a sanatorium for her own health." He walked over to the window and pulled back the curtain a fraction. "It is tragic, really. Your father died because he trusted the red man too much. And now you You will be locked away because you laid down with one hereditary madness. The doctors will call it. My father died because he knew you were a thief, Lena said. Crowley's face hardened. He turned and leaned over her, his cologne cloying and thick. Your husband will come for you today. I am counting on it. And when he does, he will see you on that train. Leaving him, he will charge in like the savage he is, and my men will cut him down. You will watch him die, Lena, and you will know it was your stubbornness that killed him. He is not a savage, Lena whispered, meeting his gaze with a look of pure contempt. He is 10 times the man you will ever be, and if he comes, he will bring the storm with him. Crowley laughed, a dry, brittle sound. Let it rain. 5 miles outside of town, in the shadow of a limestone overhang, Kai Redhawk knelt in the dirt. Opposite him sat United States Marshal Bass Reeves, a legend of the West, a man whose integrity was as unshakable as the mountain behind him. Reeves adjusted his hat, looking at the pages Kai had torn from Elias Hartley's notebook. This is a serious paper, son. You are accusing a major of the United States Army of treason, theft, and murder. The proof is in the numbers, Kai said. He was exhausted, his leg throbbing with a dull, constant ache, but his mind was sharp. Check the supply manifests against the delivery logs. Check the dates on the treaty drafts. He is starving the tribe to provoke a war so he can sell the land to the railroad. Reeves chewed on a piece of straw. Studying Kai, and you want me to do what? Arrest him in front of the governor? If you arrest him now, he will claim I forged it. He will claim I am hostile and trying to trick you. He has men everywhere, Kai explained. But today, on the train, he will be handing the deed to Pike. He will be boasting, and he will have my wife. You want to crash the party? Reeves surmised. I want to expose the rot. Kai said, my people are waiting in the canyon. If shooting starts, they will fight. But we do not want a massacre. We want justice. Reeves stood up, dusting off his knees. He looked at the scarred man before him. They say you are an outlaw, Redhawk. I am what they made me. Well, Reeves said, checking his twin Colts. I have arrested 3,000 men, and I have never arrested a man for trying to save his wife. You get me onto that train near the water tower. I will handle the governor. You handle the major. Duke Malone sat on a crate of dynamite near the tracks, smoking a cigarette. He watched the preparations for the gala. Bunting was being draped over the steam engine, the Iron Horse, a massive black beast huffing steam into the clear blue sky. Malone, Crowley shouted, striding down the platform. Position yourself on the roof of the second car. You have the best line of sight to the canyon ridge. If Redhawk shows his face, put a bullet in it. Consider it done, Malone said, flicking his cigarette away. And, Malone, Crowley paused. Make sure he is dead. I do not want a martyr. I want a corpse. Malone nodded. But as Crowley walked away, the gunman felt a sour taste in his mouth. He had killed men for money before, but he had heard things in the last few days. He had heard Pike laughing about how they tricked the chiefs. He had heard the soldiers joking about the accident that befell Dr. Hartley. Malone touched the scratch on his cheek where Lena's buckshot had grazed him. That woman had grit. And Redhawk, the man, had fought like a demon to protect her. Duke checked his rifle. He had a job to do. But for the first time in 20 years, he wasn't entirely sure what that job was. The train whistle shrieked, a piercing cry that echoed off the canyon walls. The heavy wheels began to turn, grinding against the steel rails. Lena sat in the last car, a private parlor car with velvet seats and barred windows. The door was locked. Outside, the gala was in full swing in the forward cars. She could hear the faint sound of a brass band playing a patriotic march, drowning out the rhythmic clatter of the tracks. She moved to the window. The train was picking up speed, heading toward the Redhawk Valley. They were going to drive this iron spike right through the heart of the land. She checked her boot. The guard had confiscated her father's scalpel she usually carried, but they had missed the long, thin hairpin she had hidden in her corset. It wasn't much, but to a woman who knew anatomy and mechanics, it was a tool. She went to the door. The lock was a standard, heavy-duty brass mechanism. She knelt, inserting the pin, listening for the tumblers. Her hands were sweating. Click. She turned the handle, locked from the outside with a bolt as well. She looked around the car frantically. There was a small emergency brake wheel near the rear platform door. If she could pull that, she could slow the train. Suddenly, a shadow fell over the skylight above her head. Kai did not ride a horse to catch the train. He knew the terrain better than any engineer. He had climbed the canyon wall above the Narrows, a tight squeeze where the tracks hugged the cliff face. As the engine chugged beneath him, billowing black smoke, Kai jumped. He landed hard on the roof of the third car, the impact jarring his injured leg. He rolled, flattening himself against the metal as the wind whipped at his clothes. The train was moving at 30 miles an hour now, swaying dangerously as it navigated the curves. He crawled forward. He had to get to the engine to stop the train, then work his way back to Lena. "Red Hawk!" The shout came from behind him. Kai spun around. Duke Malone stood on the roof of the second car, legs braced against the sway. Rifle raised. Kai froze. He had nowhere to go. A jump at this speed was death. He reached for his revolver, but he knew he was slower than Malone with a rifle already shouldered. Malone stared at him through the sights. The wind tore at their coats. "Crowley says you die today," Malone shouted over the roar of the engine. "Crowley is a liar and a murderer," Kai yelled back. "You know it." Malone held his aim. A second passed, then two. The train lurched. Malone lowered the rifle barrel by an inch. He spat to the side. "Yeah, I reckon he is." He swung the rifle around and fired not at Kai, but at a soldier who had just popped his head up from the ladder behind Kai. The soldier fell back with a cry. "Go get her," Malone roared. "I will hold the roof." Kai nodded once a salute between warriors and sprinted toward the front. Inside the main car, the party was interrupted by the sound of gunfire on the roof. "What is that?" the governor asked. Dropping his champagne flute, Major Crowley drew his pistol. "It seems we have a party crasher. Stay here, Governor. I will handle this." He signaled to Pike and 3 soldiers. "Come with me. We will use the girl as bait." They moved toward the rear car. Lena heard the boots pounding on the roof. She heard the shots. She knew he was here. She grabbed the emergency brake wheel and pulled with all her weight. The brakes screeched. Sparks flew from the wheels outside. The train shuddered violently, throwing passengers to the floor. It didn't stop, but it slowed significantly. The door to her car burst open. Crowley stood there, face red with fury. He saw her at the brake wheel. "You witch!" he snarled. He grabbed her by the hair, dragging her away from the wheel. He threw her toward the rear platform door. "Open it, we are going out!" He shoved her out onto the small observation deck at the very back of the train. The wind was fierce here. Below them, the tracks crossed a high wooden trestle bridge spanning the gorge. Crowley grabbed Lena, wrapping an arm around her throat and pressing the barrel of his Colt to her temple. "Come out! Red Hawk!" Crowley screamed at the roof. "I know you are there. Come out, or I paint this bridge with her brains." Kai swung down from the roof of the car, landing on the platform railing like a cat. He dropped to the deck, gun drawn, but he froze when he saw the position. "Drop it!" Crowley yelled, tightening his grip on Lena's windpipe. She gasped, clawing at his arm. "Let her go! Silas!" Kai said, his voice deadly calm. "This is between us. It ends with you dead," Crowley laughed, wild-eyed. "I win! The railroad is built! The land is mine!" Suddenly, the door behind Crowley opened. Pike stumbled out, followed by Marshal Reeves. "Drop the weapon! Major!" Reeves bellowed, his own guns leveled. "Federal Marshal, you are under arrest for treason!" Crowley's eyes darted between Kai and Reeves. He saw his world crumbling. The governor was watching from the window. The game was up. "If I go down," Crowley whispered into Lena's ear, "I will take the prize with me." He jerked Lena backward, aiming to throw both of them over the railing into the abyss below. Lena did not scream. She did not panic. She remembered the snake. Look at the shadow. Look at what lives in the shadow." She drove the long hairpin she had hidden in her hand straight back into Crowley's thigh, burying it to the hilt. Crowley shrieked, his leg buckling. His grip loosened for a fraction of a second. That was all Kai needed. He lunged. He didn't shoot. He slammed his body into Crowley, tearing Lena from his grasp and shoving her toward the safety of the wall. Kai and Crowley crashed against the railing. The wood, old and stressed by the vibration of the braking train, gave a sickening crack. "No!" Lena screamed. The railing gave way. Crowley fell backward, flailing, his eyes wide with the realization of his own mortality. He plummeted 200 feet down into the gorge, smashing against the rocks below before disappearing into the river. Kai, halfway over the edge, managed to hook one arm around a metal stanchion. He dangled over the abyss, his legs swinging in empty space. Lena threw herself forward. She grabbed his wrist with both hands. "I have you," she cried, her heels skidding on the metal deck. "I have you." She pulled, straining every muscle in her back and arms. Kai gritted his teeth, finding purchase with his other hand, and hauled himself up. He rolled onto the deck, collapsing on top of her. They lay there, chests heaving, hearts pounding in unison, while the train finally ground to a screeching halt in the middle of the bridge. The silence that followed was deafening. Minutes later, the scene was one of controlled chaos. The governor stood pale-faced on the tracks, surrounded by soldiers who had lowered their weapons upon seeing the marshal's badge. Duke Malone sat on the roof of the second car, nursing a shoulder wound where a soldier had winged him. He was smoking another cigarette, watching the proceedings with a cynical grin. "Loudest wedding reception I ever attended," he muttered to himself. On the rear platform, Marshal Reeves was reviewing the notebook Lena had handed him. He looked at Pike, who was being handcuffed by two of Reeves's deputies. "Mr. Pike," Reeves said, his voice carrying like thunder, "you have the right to remain silent. I suggest you use it, because this book says you owe the United States government about $50,000 and a lot of explanations." A medic was attending to Kai's leg on the platform. Lena knelt beside him, her dress torn, her face smudged with soot and grease. She took the bandage from the medic. "I will do it," she said. The medic looked at her, then at the way she looked at Kai, and nodded. Stepping back, Lena cleaned the wound on Kai's shin. Her hands, usually so steady, were shaking. "You jumped off a train," she whispered. "You stabbed a major," Kai replied, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. He reached out and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. His hand lingered on her cheek. "I thought I lost you," Lena said, her voice breaking. "When he took you, when I saw you hanging there, you cannot lose me," Kai said softly. "I am the sin on your saddle. Remember, hard to shake off." Lena dropped the bandage. She didn't care about the governor. She didn't care about the soldiers or the shocked townspeople who had ridden out to see the commotion. "If you had died today," she said, her voice fierce and low, "I would never have forgiven myself, not for the fighting, but because I never told you." Kai went still. "Told me what?" "That I love you," she said. The words rushed out, terrified and brave. "I love you, Kai Redhawk. I love the way you look at the horizon. I love how you protect what is yours. I love you." Kai looked at her. The darkness that had lived in his eyes for 5 years, the shadow of the massacre, the guilt, the loneliness seemed to break apart. "I was a dead man walking. Lena," he rasped, "until you picked me in that courtroom. You did not just save my neck. You saved my soul." He leaned forward, ignoring the pain in his leg, ignoring the audience. He kissed her. It was a kiss of blood and smoke, of dust and iron. But it was the sweetest thing either of them had ever tasted. It was a promise sealed in the middle of a battlefield. "I love you," he whispered against her lips. More than breathing, more than freedom. From the roof of the train car, Duke Malone watched them. He winced as he shifted his wounded shoulder, then looked up at the sky. "Well," he drawled, "for the first time in my life I did the right thing. Hurts like hell." He laughed, a dry, raspy sound. But it's a good view. The sun began to set over the canyon, painting the red rocks in shades of gold and violet. The train sat silent on the tracks, a beast tamed. The tyrant was dead. The truth was out. And on the back of the iron horse, a doctor and an outlaw held each other, having conquered the West, the railroad, and their own fears. The dust from the canyon did not settle for a long time. In the days following the collapse of the trestle railing and the fall of Major Silas Crowley, a different kind of storm swept through the Arizona Territory. It was a storm of paper, ink, and telegraph wires that hummed with the news of the Red Hawk Railroad scandal. For the first time in the history of the territory, the narrative was not written by the victors of a massacre, but by the survivors of a truth. United States Marshal Bass Reeves took over the major's office at the fort, turning the lavish suite into an interrogation room. The velvet drapes were pulled open, letting the harsh, honest light of the desert scour the corners where Crowley had plotted his treason. Lena sat across from the marshal, her hands resting on the polished mahogany desk. She looked tired. There were dark circles under her eyes, and a bruise on her arm from where Crowley had grabbed her was fading to a sickly yellow. But her voice was clear. "My father, Dr. Elias Hartley, began suspecting the discrepancies in the supply chain 6 months ago," Lena stated. "He found that 70% of the beef intended for the reservation was being sold to mining camps by Bartholomew Pike. The profits were split between Pike and Major Crowley." A stenographer, brought in from Santa Fe, typed furiously, the keys clacking like hail on a tin roof. "And the smallpox outbreak?" Reeves asked, leaning back in the chair that had once belonged to the dead tyrant. "Fabricated," Lena said, "to justify a quarantine, to keep witnesses out of the valley while the survey teams trespassed on treaty land." Reeves nodded slowly. "Your father was a brave man, Mrs. Red Hawk. The government owes him a debt, and it owes you one, too." Lena looked down at her hands. "The government owes the Red Hawk people an apology. My father just wanted the ledger balanced." The consequences were swift and brutal for those involved. Bartholomew Pike was not given the dignity of a carriage ride. He was shackled and placed in a prisoner wagon, destined for a federal penitentiary in the East. The railroad construction was halted indefinitely. A congressional committee was already forming in Washington to review the original treaty, spurred on by the sensational headlines that painted Crowley as a monster and the outlaw and the lady as unlikely heroes. But victory had a physical cost. In the infirmary wing of the barracks, the air smelled of iodine and starch. Kai lay in a narrow iron bed, his leg elevated and heavily bandaged. The army surgeon, a gruff man named Dr. Reynolds, who had silently despised Crowley for years, wiped his glasses. "He has the constitution of a Mustang," Dr. Reynolds muttered to Lena as she adjusted Kai's pillows. "Most men would have shattered the tibia completely on that landing. He just cracked it. Hard-headed, I suspect." "Hard-headed is an understatement," Lena said softly, brushing a strand of dark hair from Kai's forehead. Kai was awake, though his eyes were heavy with laudanum. He hated the infirmary. He hated the walls, the smell of white man's medicine, and the uniform of the doctor. It reminded him of captivity. But he stayed because Lena asked him to. In the bed next to him lay Duke Malone. The gunman had a shoulder wound that was healing cleanly, though he was handcuffed to the bed frame. "You look terrible, Red Hawk," Duke rasped, staring at the ceiling. "You look like a man in chains," Kai retorted, his voice raspy but steady. Duke chuckled, then winced. "Better chains than a pine box. The marshal says since I turned on Crowley and saved the roof team, the judge might go easy. 5 years, maybe, less with good behavior." "You good behavior?" Lena asked, arching an eyebrow as she checked Duke's bandages. Even though he had kidnapped her, she could not turn off her instinct to heal. "I can be a saint when the alternative is hanging." Duke grinned. Then his expression turned serious. "I heard them talking about you two." Kai tensed. "What about us?" "Just betting pools," Duke said, returning to his usual cynical tone. About how long it takes before you drive each other crazy. I put $5 on forever. Just hope when I get out of prison. You two are still arguing about who loved who first." Lena blushed, a rare flash of color returning to her cheeks. Kai merely grunted, but he reached out and took Lena's hand, squeezing it tight enough to prove Duke right. Redemption Ridge was a town suffering from a severe identity crisis. For years, the people had united under the banner of hatred for the savages, hatred for the harsh land, hatred for anyone who didn't conform. Crowley had fed that hatred, now that he was exposed as a thief who would have sacrificed the town for a railway line. The people were lost. When Lena and Kai, now walking with a crutch, finally left the fort to pick up supplies, the reaction was not the mob violence Lena had feared. It was something stranger silence. They walked down the boardwalk. Men who had jeered at Kai in the courtroom now looked at their boots or suddenly found the architecture of the saloon fascinating. Women who had whispered about Lena's morals pulled their children closer, but their eyes held more confusion than malice. They had been wrong, and for a proud frontier town, admitting error was more painful than pulling a tooth. Outside the general store, they ran into Reverend Thomas. The clergyman looked diminished, his coat hanging loosely on his frame. He stopped, blocking their path, then stepped aside nervously. "Mrs. Redhawk," he stammered. "Mr. Redhawk, Reverend," Lena said coolly. I wanted to say," the Reverend began, wringing his hands, "the memorial service for your father. We are redoing the marker, stone this time, marble." "That is kind," Lena said. "But stone does not bring him back." "No," the Reverend admitted, looking down. "I fear I was shepherded by wolves. Lena, I saw what the Major wanted me to see. I preached order when I should have preached justice. Open your eyes now, Reverend," Kai said. His voice was low, carrying the weight of the desert. "The wolf is dead, but the sheep are still lost." They walked past him. Lena felt a strange sensation in her chest. It was not forgiveness that would take time, but the heavy burden of being the town's pariah had lifted. They were no longer the outcasts. They were the mirror in which the town was forced to see its own ugly reflection. The real battle, however, was not with the town, but with the future. A week after the incident on the bridge, Marshal Reeves summoned Kai to a private meeting. They met not in an office, but on the edge of the canyon, where the land opened up into the vast territory that Kai knew better than any mapmaker. "The governor is impressed," Reeves said, lighting a cigar. "He says a man who can jump a train and take down a major without firing a shot is a man the territory needs." Kai leaned on his crutch, watching a hawk circle the thermals. "I do not need the governor's praise. He is offering you a job." "Son," Reeves said, "scout, interpreter, official liaison between the Department of the Interior and the tribes in this sector." Kai laughed, a bitter, sharp sound. "He wants me to be a dog on a leash, to help him write new treaties that will be broken in 10 years. "Maybe," Reeves admitted. "Or maybe he needs someone to make sure they aren't broken. Look, the pardon is on the table. Complete expungement of your record. No hanging, no prison. You walk free, but the condition is service." Kai looked at the badge on Reeves's chest. "I fought the blue coats my whole life. Now you want me to wear one?" "I want you to be the bridge," Reeves said. "War is easy. Kai, peace is hard work. Someone has to stand in the middle and take the arrows from both sides. You have the hide for it." Kai went home to the temporary quarters Lena had secured behind the old clinic. He was moody, silent, pacing the floor despite his bad leg. "He wants me to sell out," Kai said that night, sitting on the edge of the bed. "To work for the government that killed a pony. That killed your father." Lena was brushing her hair. She stopped and turned to him. "Is that what he asked? Or did he ask you to protect the people who are left?" "It is the same thing. If I take their money, I am their man." "No," Lena said, coming to kneel between his knees. She placed her hands on his thighs. "You are never their man. You are Kai. You are the man who stood up in a courtroom and married a stranger to save her. You are the man who stopped a train. She looked deep into his eyes. The railroad will come back. Kai, maybe not this year, maybe not next, but the Iron Horse always comes. If there is no one at the table who speaks for the Red Hawk people, who speaks for the land, then the land dies. You can be a warrior who fights and dies, or you can be a voice that lives and protects. A bridge gets walked on, Kai whispered, voicing his deepest fear, that he would become a traitor to his mother's blood. A bridge connects, Lena corrected. Be the bridge, Kai, not for the governor, for the children playing in the village. For us. The trauma of the climax did not vanish with the signing of papers. It lingered in the quiet moments, in the dark. One night, a summer thunderstorm rolled over the ridge. The crack of thunder sounded exactly like a gunshot. Kai woke up with a gasp, his hand instantly reaching for the knife he kept under his pillow. He was drenched in sweat, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. In his mind, he was back on the railing, hanging over the abyss, watching Crowley fall, feeling Lena's weight as he dragged her back. Kai! Lena's voice was soft, cutting through the panic. She was there, warm, solid, alive. She wrapped her arms around his shaking shoulders, pulling him down against her chest. I am here, she whispered. We are safe. The train has stopped. Kai buried his face in her neck, breathing in her scent lavender and rain. He trembled, the adrenaline of the nightmare slowly fading into the ache of old wounds. I saw you fall, he murmured. Every night, I see you fall. I did not fall, Lena soothed, stroking his hair. You caught me. You always catch me. It was a vulnerability he had never shown anyone. To the world, he was the outlaw, the stone-faced warrior. To her, in the dark, he was a man terrified of losing the one thing that made him want to live. Lena held him until his breathing evened out. She had her own ghosts, the image of her father dead at his desk, the feel of the knife sinking into Crowley's leg, but she found that her ghosts were quieter when she was holding Kai. They were two broken pieces that, when fitted together, made something whole. The decision to stay or leave came on a Tuesday, under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. They sat on the porch of the clinic. The town was moving on. A new doctor was arriving from St. Louis next month to take over the practice, as Lena had no formal degree to operate it legally. We could go to California, Kai said, looking west. I hear the ocean is endless, no dust, no memories. We could, Lena agreed. We could open a shop, or a small farm. No one would know us. It sounded like paradise, a clean slate. But, Lena added, tracing a pattern on the wooden railing, who will translate for the elder mother when the new Indian agent arrives? Kai sighed. No one. They will cheat her out of the water rights within a month. And who will make sure the new doctor treats the children from the reservation without charging them a fortune? He will likely turn them away at the door. Kai admitted. They looked at each other. The fantasy of California dissolved like mist. They were creatures of this desert. Their blood was mixed with this red earth. To leave would be to abandon the victory they had bled for. We stay, Kai said. It was not a resignation. It was a vow. We stay, Lena agreed. But not in town, and not in the village. The outpost, Kai asked. The outpost, Lena smiled. It is halfway. It belongs to neither, and it belongs to both. We can make it. Something new. The transformation of the Dead Man's Wash outpost began 2 weeks later. The government, as part of the deal for Kai's services and in recognition of Lena's assistance, deeded the land and the structure to them. They were given a grant for lumber and supplies reparations, in a sense, for the burning of the roof. It was a hot afternoon when they arrived to start the work. The charred remains of the porch had been cleared away. The adobe walls stood strong, golden in the sun. Lena unrolled a large sheet of paper on the hood of the wagon. She had drawn a plan. Here, she pointed. The main room becomes the clinic. We add a wing here for travelers, a neutral ground for meetings. And here, in the back, a proper kitchen. Kai studied the drawing. And the corral. Bigger, Lena said. You will need space for the horses you train. The army has already asked if you will sell them mounts. Honest mounts, Not the lame ones Pike sold them. Kai looked at the paper, then at the ruin of the shack. He saw the future Lena was drawing. It was not a fortress. It was a home. "We will need help," Kai said. "I cannot lift the main beams alone with this leg." As if summoned by his words, a cloud of dust appeared on the horizon from the west. Then another from the east. From the west came a group of Red Hawk warriors. They did not carry war paint. They carried tools. The young man Lena had saved from the bullet wound was among them, riding a pinto pony. From the east, a wagon rolled in. It was driven by the town blacksmith, a man who had once refused to shoe Kai's horse. Beside him sat the young man, Ethan Lowell. Ethan looked humbled, perhaps shamed into action by the shift in public opinion. "Heard you folks needed lumber," the blacksmith called out, his face red but his voice steady. "And I figure the town owes you a roof." Kai stood up, his hand resting near his gun belt out of habit. Then, relaxing, he looked at the warriors, then at the townsmen. Two worlds, converging on a patch of burnt ground in the middle of nowhere. The elder mother rode up on a travois. She beckoned to Lena. "You build on blood," she said in her language, which Lena now understood well. "But blood makes the grass grow green. This is a good place." Lena looked at Kai. He was shaking hands awkwardly, but firmly with the blacksmith. The Red Hawk warriors were unloading logs, nodding to the white men. It was tense. It was fragile. A single wrong word could shatter it, but it was happening. Lena picked up a hammer. She walked over to where Kai stood. "Where do we start, husband?" she asked. Kai looked at her. The sun was setting, casting long shadows that stretched toward the mountains. He looked like the man she had first seen, the dark hair, the dangerous grace, but the hardness around his mouth was gone. "We start with the foundation," Kai said. "We make it deep, so nothing can blow it down again." He took a beam from the wagon. Lena took the other end. It was heavy, rough-hewn, and smelled of pine resin. Together, they lifted it. The sound of hammers began to ring out across the desert, a rhythm of creation replacing the rhythm of gunfire. It was the sound of the falling action settling into the earth, laying the stones for a resolution that had been earned, not given. The outpost was no longer a place where people went to die or hide. It was becoming Red Hawk Crossing. And as Lena watched Kai working side by side with men who had once hunted him, she knew that while the romance of the Wild West was often a lie, the love they had built in the crossfire was the truest thing in the territory. The year was 1880, and the wind that swept through the valley of the Red Hawk people no longer smelled of gunpowder and fear. It smelled of sage, drying clay, and the faint, sweet scent of roasting corn. Red Hawk Crossing was no longer a ruin where two desperate people hid from the world. It had become the beating heart of the territory. The sagging roof had been replaced by sturdy timber beams, hauled down from the high country. The single room had expanded into a sprawling compound. There was a clinic with whitewashed walls that gleamed in the sun. There was a general office where treaties were translated and disputes settled not with pistols, but with coffee and patience. There was a stable that housed some of the finest horses in Arizona, and a way station where travelers, be they soldiers, settlers, or tribal elders, could find a bed and a meal. The railroad, that great iron beast that had once threatened to devour them, had been tamed. After the scandal that sent Major Crowley to his watery grave and Bartholomew Pike to a federal cell, the engineers had been forced to listen. The new line curved respectfully around the southern rim of the valley, a detour of 20 miles that saved a civilization. Lena Hartley Red Hawk stood on the porch of the clinic, wiping her hands on a clean apron. She was 30 years old now, and the sun had etched fine lines around her eyes, lines that came from smiling as often as they came from squinting against the glare. She wore a dress of practical blue cotton, cut to allow movement, with a beaded leather belt that was a gift from the elder mother. "2 goats," Lena said firmly to the man standing at the bottom of the steps. Mr. Henderson, a settler who had arrived 6 months ago, twisted his hat in his hands. "2 goats just fixing a fence. For fixing the fence and for the corn your mule ate while the fence was down, Lena corrected. She glanced at the Red Hawk farmer standing beside him. A man named Tall Tree. Does that sound fair? Tall Tree nodded solemnly. Fair. The mule has a large appetite. 2 goats. Henderson sighed, putting his hat back on. All right, Mrs. Hartley Red Hawk. Your word is law out here. Not law, mister. Henderson, Lena said, her voice softening. Balance. We survive here by balance. She watched them walk away together, arguing amiably about the quality of the goats. It was a small victory, one of hundreds recorded in the thick black notebook she kept on her desk. The pages that had once detailed corruption and death were now filled with the names of babies she had delivered mixed blood and pure blood alike, and the agreements she had brokered. She turned back to the clinic, but the sound of hoofbeats stopped her. It was a rhythm she knew better than her own heartbeat. A black stallion crested the rise, moving with a power that seemed to shake the ground. The rider sat easy in the saddle, his body swaying in perfect time with the animal. He wore a mixture of world's-high leather riding boots of a cavalry scout, buckskin leggings, and a white linen shirt that was open at the throat. Kai Red Hawk was home. He had been gone for 2 weeks, guiding a government survey team through the Badlands to ensure they stayed on the agreed path. He looked tired. Dust coated his skin like a second layer of armor, and his hair, now touched with the faintest hint of silver at the temples, was tied back with a leather thong. But as he drew closer, Lena saw the thing that had changed the most in 5 years. His eyes. They were no longer the dead, flat eyes of a man waiting for a bullet. They were alive. They were sharp. They were the eyes of a man who had something to lose. Papa! The shout came from the garden patch near the creek. A small figure exploded from the corn rows, hair flying like a dark banner. Mira Sunhawk was 4 years old, a creature of boundless energy and fierce intelligence. She had Kai's dark skin and Lena's determined chin. One of her eyes was the dark brown of the earth. The other held a fleck of gray like a storm cloud. Kai swung down from the stallion. Ignoring the slight stiffness in his leg, the old break from the bridge still complained when the weather turned, a permanent reminder of the day they won. He caught his daughter in midair, swinging her up until she shrieked with laughter. Did you bring me a rock? Mira demanded, speaking the Red Hawk tongue fluently. Better, Kai answered in English, his voice rasping with road dust. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a geode, cracked open to reveal glittering purple crystals inside. I brought you a piece of the mountain. He set her down, and she ran off to show the elder mother, who was sitting in the shade of the porch. Kai walked up the steps to where Lena waited. He stopped 1 step below her, so their eyes were level. He smelled of horse sweat, sagebrush, and the open miles. To anyone else, it might have been the smell of a rough man. To Lena, it was the perfume of safety. The survey team? Lena asked, reaching out to brush dust from his collar. They stayed on the line. Kai said, they learned that if they cross the markers, the rattlesnakes are the least of their worries. Did you have to threaten them? I just cleaned my knife by the fire. Kai smirked, the expression making him look 10 years younger. It is a very persuasive language. He leaned in, his forehead resting against hers. I miss the sound of your voice. Lena, the silence out there. It gets loud. Go wash, she whispered, her hand lingering on his cheek. Dinner is in an hour, and I think there's a bottle of wine left from the Christmas shipment. That evening, the outpost settled into a hum of contentment. The travelers in the bunkhouse were asleep. The horses were fed. The desert cooled rapidly. The heat of the day bleeding up into a sky so filled with stars it looked like spilled milk. Lena stood on the back veranda, leaning against the railing. Her body was tired, a good tiredness, born of work that mattered. She heard the door open behind her. Kai stepped out. He had washed the dust away, his damp hair loose around his shoulders. He moved silently, coming up behind her to wrap his arms around her waist. He pulled her back against his chest, his chin resting on her shoulder. Mira is asleep, he asked softly. Out like a light, She tried to tell me the story of the coyote and the moon, but she fell asleep before the coyote could steal the fire. Kai chuckled, the vibration rumbling against Lena's back. She has your spirit. She will be in trouble. She has your stubbornness, Lena countered, leaning into him. She will be a force of nature. They stood there for a long moment, watching the moon rise over the distant mesas. The land was vast, indifferent, and beautiful. It had tried to kill them, and now it sustained them. Kai's hands shifted, his thumbs tracing the line of her waist through the cotton of her dress. The touch was familiar, practiced, but it never lost its electric charge. "You know," Kai murmured, his lips brushing the sensitive skin just below her ear. "The men at the fort, they still tell stories about the outlaw who stole the doctor's daughter. Is that right?" Lena turned in his arms, facing him. Her hands came up to rest on his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "They say he was a devil," Kai whispered, his voice dropping to a low growl that made Lena's knees weak. "They say he bewitched her." "They have the story wrong," Lena said, her fingers sliding up into his hair, pulling his face down to hers. "The daughter stole the outlaw, and she has no intention of returning him." Kai groaned low in his throat. He kissed her, and the years melted away. It was not the desperate, frantic kiss of the train car, nor the tentative first kiss in the rain. It was a kiss of deep, abiding ownership. It was slow, thorough, and devastatingly intimate. He lifted her easily, her feet leaving the floorboards. Lena wrapped her legs around his waist, burying her face in the curve of his neck, breathing him in. "You still look like sin on a saddle, Kai Redhawk," she whispered against his skin. "And you," he replied, carrying her toward the door, "are the only prayer that ever worked." He kicked the door shut behind them, sealing out the world, leaving only the two of them in the sanctuary they had built from the ashes. 3 days later, a lone rider approached Red Hawk Crossing. He rode a mule, not a horse. The animal was sturdy, stubborn, and moved with a distinct limp that matched its rider. Lena was in the garden when she saw him. She shaded her eyes, squinting against the glare. The man wore a duster that had seen better decades, and a hat that was more whole than felt. She stood up slowly, her trowel dropping from her hand. "Kai," she called out. "Kai, come out here." Kai emerged from the stable, a curry comb in his hand. He looked at the rider, and a slow grin spread across his face. The rider halted the mule by the fence. He swung down with a grunt of pain, favoring his left leg. He looked older. His hair was gray, his face a roadmap of scars, but the eyes were the same, cynical, amused, and sharp as a tack. "Duke," Kai said. Duke Malone spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dust. "Well, ain't this a domestic picture? A garden, really. Red Hawk, I expected you to be raising wolves, not squash." "The squash bites less," Kai said, walking forward to offer his hand. Duke took it. His grip was still iron. "Don't be so sure. I had a run-in with a pumpkin once in Omaha. Vicious vegetable." Lena walked over, wiping her hands on her apron. "Duke Malone, I thought you were in Leavenworth." "Released early," Duke said, tipping his hat to her. "Good behavior. Can you believe it? Apparently, not killing anyone for 3 years counts as a miracle for a man like me." He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small, wrapped bundle. He tossed it to Lena. "Marshal Reeves sent that. Ran into him in Santa Fe. Said he held on to it for you." Lena unwrapped the cloth. Inside was a heavy tin star. It was not the shiny badge of a town sheriff. It was the old, battered badge of the territory marshal who had served before Crowley's corruption. "He said to tell you," Duke relayed, leaning against his mule. "That law is what is written on paper. Justice is what you two did on that bridge. He said you earned the badge more than any man currently wearing one." Lena ran her thumb over the metal. It was cool and heavy. "We cannot wear this, Duke." "No," Duke agreed. "But you can hang it over the door. Let folks know what kind of house this is." He looked around the compound. He looked at the clinic, the stable, the way the Red Hawk warriors moved freely among the white travelers. He looked at Mira, who was peeking out from behind Kai's leg. "You got a job for a washed-up gunman?" Duke asked, his voice trying to be casual and failing. "I cannot shoot like I used to. Shoulder stiffens up, but I know horses, and I can teach the little one how to shoot a snake without blowing her own toe off." Kai looked at Lena. They didn't need to speak. They knew Duke was another piece of the wreckage. Just like them. "The stable needs a master," Kai said. "And the bunkhouse has a spare room. But Duke..." "Yeah, no chewing tobacco in the clinic. Lena will scalp you." Duke laughed, a sound like dry leaves rustling. "Yes, sir. I reckon I can abide by that." The sun went down on Red Hawk Crossing, painting the sky in violent streaks of purple and gold before settling into the deep velvet blue of the desert night. They sat on the front porch of the main house. It was a ritual now. The work was done. The air was cooling. Lena sat on the swinging bench, her head resting on Kai's shoulder. Mira was asleep in her lap, a heavy, warm weight of exhausted childhood. Kai had one arm around Lena, his other hand resting on his knee, relaxed but ready. Duke sat on the steps a few feet away, whittling a piece of cedar. The shavings curled onto his boots. "You know," Duke said quietly, looking out at the silhouette of the mountains. "I rode with a lot of posses, rode with a lot of gangs. Never thought I would end up riding herd on a clinic." "Life is strange," Kai said. "It is not strange," Lena corrected gently. "It is what you make it. We stopped running. Duke, that is the difference." A coyote howled in the distance, a lonely, wavering note. A dog from the village answered it. Then silence returned, vast and comforting. Lena looked up at the stars. They were the same stars she had looked at from her bedroom window in town, back when she was the spinster daughter of the crazy doctor. They were the same stars she had watched from the roof of the burning outpost, terrified and alive. They hadn't changed, but she had. She looked at Kai. His profile was etched against the starlight. He was no longer the stranger in chains. He was her partner, her lover, the father of her child. He was the bridge between the past she had lost and the future she was building. She thought of Major Crowley, falling into the dark. She thought of her father, dying for the truth. She thought of the long, dusty road that had led them here. She shifted slightly, pulling the blanket tighter around Mira. "What are you thinking?" Kai asked, feeling her movement. Lena smiled, pressing a kiss to his shoulder. "I was thinking about that day in the courtroom," she whispered. "When they told me I had to choose, they thought they were giving me a sentence. They thought they were ending my life." She looked out at the lights of the crossing, the lantern in the stable where Duke would sleep, the fire in the village where her friends lived, the endless, open land that belonged to no one and everyone. "They told me I had to marry a stranger," Lena said, her voice thick with emotion. "I picked the outlaw who looked like sin on a saddle, and in exchange, I got the whole world." Kai tightened his arm around her. Duke chuckled softly in the dark. The wind blew through the canyon, no longer a threat, but a song of freedom. And under the vast, watchful eyes of the Arizona sky, the family that had been forged in fire sat together in the peace they had made, ready for whatever the next sunrise would bring. Thank you so much for listening to They Ordered Her to Marry a Stranger. She Picked the Outlaw Who Looked Like Sin on a Saddle. I hope you enjoyed this journey through the Wild West as much as I enjoyed writing it. I would love to hear from you. Please leave a comment below telling me where you are listening from. It is always amazing to see how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed Lena and Kai's story, please consider subscribing to my channel, Wild West Tales, and hitting that like button. And if you really want to support the channel, smash that hype button so this story can reach even more listeners. Until next time, keep your powder dry and your eyes on the horizon.